Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, George Clooney and Disney take us to Tomorrowland. Sam Rockwell stars in a Poltergeist remake. A classic book and film get an update as well in Far From the Madding Crowd. And we have two home media moments for you. Jason Statham in Wild Card and Best Animated Feature nominee The Tale of the Princess Kaguya. Our triple feature of older films is Star Trek Into Darkness, my old classic pick, The Craft, and Oscar winner, The Aviator. And we also have some news for you on a classic cartoon getting a live-action big screen feature. First up, though, is Tomorrowland, and we're going to talk to Joe about that.
Yeah. Tomorrowland is a science fiction mystery adventure directed by Brad Bird, who is awesome usually, and co-written and produced by Bird himself and Damon Lindelof. The film stars George Clooney, Hugh Laurie, and Britt Robertson, as well as some appearances by, Tim McGraw, Catherine Hahn, and Keegan-Michael Key. The film tells the story of a former boy genius, played by Clooney, obviously when he was younger, there was a child actor there, and a young girl, Robertson, who travel to an ambiguous dimension known as Tomorrowland, where their actions directly affect the world and themselves. And it's pretty much a race against time, and there's robots and lasers and lots of product placement and Disney advertising in your face. This movie is something that I was a bit surprised about. Apparently a lot of people were expecting this one to be big, or expecting to do well and be well received and loved by people. And I, apparently before going into this, kind of just started to hear little rumors that it wasn't quite as well loved as people were expecting it to be, and which genuinely surprised me, and I was wondering why that could be. And I went in and I thought, wow, this movie opens up and it's awesome. You just get this really nostalgic feel of just classic science fiction, and this wondrous sense of childhood. It's really fun. And that's like the first 10 minutes of the movie, and then there's everything else, which is unfortunate. And I'm not trying to say that that's like the worst thing ever, but the movie plays out almost like a low-key thriller, and I almost feel like it appeals more to adults for the most part. Like, I kept thinking to myself, small children probably wouldn't be that excited by most of this movie. Now, I do think the film does try to touch a little bit on some cool concepts, regarding science fiction, and some pretty classical commentary on society, and there's some political stuff, but once again, not really a lot I think young kids would be interested in. Now, I applaud Disney for tackling this subject matter, but the problem is they never go that far with it anyway. And there were some interesting twists, and I do think that the performances were good, but this movie just lacks a lot of the fun, and I would argue the biggest problem, maybe once again advertising, but for a movie that's supposed to be advertising this theme park attraction, make it the center of the movie, there's very little Tomorrowland in Tomorrowland. Don't really want to spoil that for you, but that first 10 minutes of the movie where you really feel embroidered by that sense of wonder is the most that you get the sense of what this movie probably should have been. It works out okay, the story's decent, there's a good message there, but on the whole, a little too adult for kids, but not really in depth enough for adults, so it kind of stands okay with a B-.
Well, I actually thought it started out a little bit shaky. The awkward, Clooney voiceover thing, I was sort of like, what is happening here? I do admit that once they get into, the science fair and stuff, that part's cool. But the problem mainly with the movie is it gets overstuffed with ideas. Mm-hmm. It provides some unanswered questions.
Lots.
And certainly gets lost in its own science.
Oh, yeah.
But I do agree that the acting is good. I think Robertson holds her own with Clooney.
Yeah.
Who, if I'm being honest, is not at his best here. I thought he was he did all right, but I've seen him do a lot better.
It's called the standard.
It's standard, I guess. But it is the young performers that are really the stars of the show. Thomas Robinson as the young Frank, which is little George Clooney. Mm-hmm. To Raffi Cassidy as the robot Athena. She was really great in this.
Yeah.
Visually, it looks pretty cool, though. You have to wonder, with all the studios clamoring to provide audiences with a decent 3D product, it seems like this one would have been perfect for the 3D format, much more than certain other Disney movies of late.
Oh, yes.
And I don't know why they did not do that. But anyway, the conclusion, I think, is far too much of a message for summer family entertainment, and I'm not sure that it was all that satisfying in the first place. But on the whole, I thought the film was decent. I'm slightly above you, Joe. I give it a B. Justin?
All right. Well, writer Damon Lindelof is notorious for posing more questions than answers, but how does that motif work for a family film is probably the big question I had on my mind when I was going to go see this. And the answer is fairly well, but not nearly as well as one might hope. Now, director Brad Bird, who is in fact amazing, The Incredibles, The Iron Giant, Mission Impossible 4, he continues his streak of telling original and compelling stories, but unlike his others, this time he takes a bit to honestly find his ground. I thought the first, I'd probably say even half hour, take a little while to get going. I really did not like the opening motif of basically Clooney and Robertson bickering across each other.
I didn't either.
They tried to do that in The Lone Ranger 2. I thought it was terrible.
Joe's favorite.
Not nearly as bad here as it was there, but
I liked it.
But once the wheels get turning, I feel like it starts going in the right places. It's just, I feel like this is a lot of ideas that, if I had cut it down to like 2 or 3, could have been really solid stuff. Because some of the observations are really poignant. And I feel like there's good conversation material here for families. But I agree with you, Dan. It is incredibly heavy-handed in that department.
Yeah.
And I feel like...
I knew you would hate that.
It's heavy-handed, but I can honestly respect it. It's just, I wish that it had come out not in the summer, but rather in like the fall or something like that, where that could have been taken more at face value. When, let's face it, most of the time in the summer, we're just looking to watch Hulk fight a giant robot.
Yeah, it's like this should be a popcorn movie.
Yeah. I don't blame it for trying not to be.
But then again, sometimes the summer blockbusters can be smart, like Live, Die, Repeat.
That's true.
No, I think that there's I feel like there's a balance you have to attain, though, for that.
I agree.
Which, this did not have that down in full. But I did enjoy myself. I really loved the visuals. I thought that component was absolutely fantastic. Overall, I'd give it a B.
Did either of you see the deleted scene that Pixar did for this film?
I heard about it.
I just watched it a few hours ago. I didn't know it existed, but I sort of saw it on this newswire. And basically, it's like a 2.5-minute scene that was supposed to be in the movie. I'm not exactly sure where. Possibly when young Clooney first gets there. But it basically describes what Tomorrowland is. It sort of fills in the gaps, I guess. It's basically what George Clooney explains to Britt Robertson when they go inside the Eiffel Tower.
Okay.
I mean, it's a little helpful, I guess, but it seems like it would have been sort of out of place in the movie because it's animated. So I don't know if they were having somebody watch it on a TV and have it explained. It seemed weird. But, yeah, you guys and the audience will have to kind of check that out and see if it helps answer any of the questions that we don't know the answer to.
Joe, I wanted to go back to your point about we don't see as much of Tomorrowland as we probably should. I agree with you to an extent, but I also feel like that's also their attempt at trying to hit home the central point of it, is that Tomorrowland then isn't what Tomorrowland we perceive it as now.
I know, but this kind of touches on, I think, some of the advertising as well, and placement. If you're going to do this summer movie about Tomorrowland, which is functioned around, this park, basically, with this futuristic yet retro park, which they kind of open the movie with, I think, sets the stage for it. I want more of that. Now, the way the movie plays out and what the movie ultimately is, kind of means that you can't have less of that, honestly. But that doesn't mean that I like it. It was not the movie I was expecting, and I think for a lot of people it wasn't too. You know what I think might have satisfied me a little bit? The race against time low-key mystery element, I think, kind of doesn't jive well with the tone of what Tomorrowland probably should have been, at least what is advertised as. But there's a scene, a very brief scene, which I guess storytelling speeds up things, explaining what happened to George Clooney's character when he was there growing up, actually kind of in Tomorrowland. If we had actually seen more of that, which
I
could have used more of that.
Like maybe a couple scenes, maybe a few flashbacks, just to kind of get a sense of the wonder of this place, I would have felt the magic a little more. Just a little more.
I'm actually glad you brought that up, Joe, because I like the way that they were trying to interject that with the present, such as the weird flashback contraption that she finds in his house at one point.
Hologram stuff.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It is really interesting. I wish we had like 2 or 3 more of those. I feel like we would have gotten enough to sort of like really grasp his character as a whole.
And if they want to do that motif, just have her find different discs and put them in and play them.
And here's like a different scene.
While
Other
he's
movies
outside.
have done, like Minority Report. There have been other movies that do that sort of thing. Where you can kind of temporarily go inside the memory. Or Harry Potter. Like those scenes can be really captivating, and we already kind of established what Tomorrowland was when she finds out about it.
Yeah.
Find more of those. I think that would have been really cool, and if they just done a few scenes like that, I would have been satisfied with Tomorrowland, and then maybe if you don't get it quite as much, then, oh, I see.
You keep mentioning the race against time, which it is, but the time is like 58
Subjective.
days. It's like we have 2 months to do this.
Wait.
And it seems
yeah.
it seems like maybe they could dial it back a little bit. We have maybe a week to do this. Like 58 days seems like you could get a lot done to
A couple months.
to stop this from happening in that time period.
Look what they did in Armageddon. They had plenty of time.
It could have been pared down a
know,
little bit, I feel like.
Didn't think about it, but you're right. The race against time doesn't feel quite, oh yeah.
As urgent.
Yeah, you have 2 months.
And the
Okay.
You could do something.
Yeah, we can manage that. All right, well, up next we have Poltergeist. This is a remake, of course, of the 1982 horror film, this time starring Sam Rockwell and Rosemarie DeWitt as new homeowners who, after some strange things start happening, learn their house was actually built on a cemetery. Gil Keenan directs, and Sam Raimi lends his name as producer for some extra points. When remaking one of the most classic horror films of all time, though, you really do have to tread lightly. Leave enough of the original material intact, but do something different to make it stand on its own. What Poltergeist decided to do differently was have every single character, including the paranormal investigators, be complete morons. It also took away some of the most iconic things of the film. The famous "they're here" line becomes this monotone nothing, as an example. The CGI is pretty bad and uninspired as well. I will give Rockwell and DeWitt that they do their best here to keep this thing afloat. There's a few small scares and an interesting power drill sequence. But like most horror remakes, there just isn't a need for it, especially when nothing about it is even on par with the original. For me, Poltergeist is a D+. Justin?
In an age where Insidious is essentially a remake of Poltergeist in and of itself, I have to ask why on earth even bother making an official version? Now, director Gil Keenan, Monster House, which was so much better than this, once had a technique that would have been perfect for this had it come out about a decade ago. Now, those days are completely gone. The acting is pitiful. Rockwell gets a couple decent one-liners early on, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Ooh, Rockwell suffers.
Jared Harris, I guess another bad supernatural Jared Harris movie.
Oh, yes, Moriarty himself.
Oh, that's where I know him. Okay.
Nah. The CGI I thought got a little bit better later on. I thought the moments in the climax were okay. I've seen far worse, but it's those moments that kept it from being a complete disaster, but it's just another waste of a remake in a long line of them in recent years. I leave it with a D.
Well, and forget RoboCop for a second, Joe, but just in the horror genre. I mean, you had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
20 times.
You had a new, what was it, Halloween? Didn't they do that a couple years ago?
Yep.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Nightmare on Elm Street they remade
Friday the
with,
13th.
What's his name?
Friday the 13th. And...
Yeah, I
Why?
don't... Well, and,
Why?
you know, and it speaks to the CGI point. Like, if you're going to have a movie, first of all, a 3D horror movie in 2015 with lousy CGI, I can watch the original for lousy CGI. Because nothing on the original, but it was made in 1982. The CGI is not great. Or probably wasn't CGI, it was whatever, you know. Animatronics or whatever they did. But, I mean, yeah, if you're going to watch something like that, why not make it good looking? Spend the extra $5 million or whatever to really...
Because, Dan,
make it look good.
They're going to see it because it's the Poltergeist.
Here's one thing that I thought was really ironic about this one. I saw the first Poltergeist probably when I was 10 or so. My first horror movie.
Scary.
Good one.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was actually really glad I started out with that one. For the most part, I would argue it still holds up.
Yeah,
it does.
But the one scene I don't think does is done even worse here, and that's the dumb tree attack scene.
I know.
So much worse than the original.
Yes, it is. And that actually, I would say that's the worst CGI that this remake has to offer, is the tree scene. I mean, it's ridiculous. It looks like a TV show from the 90s. It looks like first season X-Files when, you know, stuff's going on. It's like... All right.
It's a green screen.
At the time, it looked all right, but it looks like a green screen now.
The tree is clawing at the window, Joe.
It's bad. Now, I do have to point out, Joe did not see this. It's not like we're ignoring him. But
no,
Joe, you would hate it.
I didn't think I'd like it. I mean, honestly, the thing that surprises me, though, that you guys are saying to me, is one thing I wasn't worried about. I was actually like, okay, you know...
What, Sam Rockwell?
No, well, Sam Rockwell's fine, but... He's always great. No, but the thing I thought to myself, okay, it's probably just going to be lame, just going to retread the same story and the same scenes. But I thought, okay, maybe because it didn't look like there was much CGI. You don't really need much CGI with the puppets and the clown.
Right.
I thought, let's have some really cool practical effects, which is what's always awesome in horror. And you tell me it's all CGI. That
pretty
is
much,
just,
more or less, yeah.
You would do better doing the tree scene, just better animatronics. It would look real. Wood. It's not get wood and shape it like a hand. It's not that hard. Mm-hmm. You can do it for free. You go outside, you carve something. You don't have to spend money generating it on the computer.
Yeah.
So that surprises me, honestly.
It's Justin, what did you think about that little girl? I think they were going when they did the monotone. Here's her line read for "They're Here." Joe, ready? She just turns around and she goes, probably in about this kind of voice. "They're here."
Oh.
I think they're going for this, like, dead eyes kind of, like, spooky, but it just comes off as, like, nothing. It comes off as nothing.
Oh, they're here.
They're here.
That's nice.
Okay, cool.
Demonic hordes outside.
Yeah.
Get your change ready.
Like,
they got the beers.
Scary people on the TV. What are we going to do?
Insidious devils got the barbecue, you know?
It's funny you mentioned Insidious, Justin, because I did not make that parallel until watching this movie. I had seen the original Poltergeist maybe 8 years ago, and by the time I saw Insidious, it didn't really occur to me that yes, they're really doing a lot of the same things that Poltergeist did, 25 years earlier. But here it's really obvious, which does beg the question: why do we need this movie?
Why even bother? Especially
because Insidious is great.
That's part of the reason I'm actually okay with the fact that this is not doing well financially, because I feel like if this did make a lot of money, everyone would be saying, "Oh, this is such an Insidious ripoff."
Interesting.
They make these movies so cheaply, though. I'm sure it's making money. It made 20-some million opening weekend.
It's wild.
So, I mean, it'll probably top off at, about 50 million. I'm sure it didn't cost more than...
6?
Yeah, definitely single digits. So, I mean, it's making money, as these all do, but... At what cost? No pun intended.
At what cost? The good taste, sir.
Good news is you're going to break even. Bad news is you
made a terrible movie.
Yeah, you tortured audiences.
All right, up next we're going to do Far From the Madding Crowd, and that's with Justin.
Okay. Carey Mulligan plays Bathsheba Everdeen, a young independent woman using her family inheritance to keep their farm afloat. As time goes on, Miss Everdeen attracts suitors, the likes of a dedicated sheep farmer, played by Matthias Schoenaerts,
Farmer Oak,
a sergeant, played by Tom Sturridge, and an older bachelor, played by Michael Sheen, as she becomes entangled between questioning what's good for her and what's good for the farm. We came into the work of Thomas Vinterberg with the Oscar-nominated foreign film The Hunt, which was fantastic, and while this isn't quite up to par with that, Far still showcases that Vinterberg definitely has some talent behind the camera. His shots are really compelling, and they have life to them, which I think is something that we don't see too often in those period pieces. They're usually very dry, and you sort of have to... You're either on board or you're not.
Everything's kind of like in your face. Like you can almost feel like you're around them. You can sense the dirt.
Mm-hmm.
But Mulligan in the role of Everdeen conveys herself in a way that makes her both strong and independent, but like I mentioned before, without being this sort of pompous character the likes of an Austin cutout.
No.
At least until the soapy sections, which I feel is where the movie sort of teeters, because the story outside of the romance is really, really interesting. But once we start heading into this melodramatic love triangle, it just loses its focus, and there's only really one person that in the love triangle you care about.
Yes.
And the other two is just poor victim and complete jerk. Or as Joe put it much better, no.
No, we'll get to him.
But fortunately, that doesn't really come into play until about 2/3 into the movie. But it really does pull down this compelling human element that I really liked about these characters ahead of that time. It's not perfect, but I do think the performances are good. I do think the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. I just wish it had a better story to go along with it. I leave it with a B.
Joe, what'd you think of Far From the Madding Crowd?
I actually really like Mulligan in this movie. Yeah.
Interesting.
I thought she did a good job. The performances were good. I agree with you, Justin. I think the cinematography was nice. I think there's a particular shot early on where you can really notice Farmer Oak's pain because he kind of loses his sheep and he kind of loses everything. That's pretty intense, actually, even though it's kind of getting this sense of how difficult it could just be in the daily life of a farmer back in the day, how much your life depends on these things. And the poignant scene with what happens to his dog, I thought was pretty. You know a lot about this guy, but it starts off pretty intense, and I think that these characters are kind of dynamic to an extent. And one thing I have to say, you didn't mention, Justin, it looks really good. I love the costumes in this movie. The costumes,
That's true.
were really good. They seemed real, but they were colorful, and you could tell there was some really good design there. I
Good detail.
really loved the design there with these costumes. They were great. I definitely appreciated that. I do agree the story is definitely strongest when it's not around the romance. Now, the thing about it is that's frustrating, though, besides the fact that by the end of the movie you kind of feel like everything that came before it is kind of unnecessary. But even besides it, let's just say, okay, things happen, whatnot. That character, the soldier, who is the worst person ever, by the way.
Oh, yeah, he stinks.
He doesn't need to exist.
No.
He does not. His entire...
I agree.
He makes this woman seem completely out of character. It was like the worst part of the story. Like, she even says blatantly in the film, "Wow, this contradicts everything I've ever said about myself." Exactly.
Yes.
There's never been any indication that you do anything like this. You just go off with... It's not her character. It just... For like a whole act of this movie, the whole second act, it's like completely broken up. We gotta have this crazy soldier who's got his whole subplot, and he's horrible. And okay, basically, there's only two men that she needs to be struggling with, and it just makes sense. Like, you got the guy who it makes sense for her to be with.
Rich man, poor man.
Rich man will take care of her. They got the poor man. That's fine. And I like the fact that they do kind of bond, and they kind of respect one another, and that's really interesting. Like, the one guy's willing to kind of... The farmer is willing to actually give it up for her, because he doesn't think he's good enough. And I think there is enough there to keep it interesting without the psycho soldier that just seems totally out of place. So, in all honesty, if he hadn't been such a big part of it, or his story had been like a subplot or something, it would have been less difficult. However, I did think it was well acted, well shot and everything, but it would have gotten a much higher grade had it not been for that really out of character, tone-shifting moment with him. Just went on too long. But I do agree with Justin. I leave it with a B. I thought that was a decent movie.
Well, I have long stated that, shame, close-up singing scene aside, Joe,
Yeah.
Mulligan is the real deal.
Okay.
She was, for me, the perfect Daisy in The Great Gatsby. Now she takes on another classic literary female here and just nails it. I think she exudes all of the intelligence, sexuality, and vulnerability that the character needs.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the acting is strong, not just from her. I think Michael Sheen is very noteworthy. Some of my favorite scenes are with just the two of them.
A lot of subtlety there.
There really is. And, for me, I didn't mind the soapy nature of it, the romance part. I do agree that the soldier story does not need to exist.
What's up with that?
Juno Temple, in general, in film, does not need to exist. She's usually awful.
Is that
and was pointless here. That was his, the
fiance.
girl that...
Yeah.
By the way, but before... Sorry, Dan.
That's
sorry,
useless.
Dan, by the way, we need to mention this.
If there's one thing more useless than him, it's her.
No, thank you for reminding me.
Yes.
But just 1 second. The dumbest character in fiction. You're getting ready for your wedding. You went to the wrong church.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Oh,
Idiot.
So dumb.
I just kept thinking to myself during that scene, how is it humanly possible that you can do that?
La 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 la. Wow.
That was before GPS, all right?
I guess.
Cut her a break.
Which is why you know the
I
church
know.
you're going.
She's an idiot.
Oof.
And doesn't really need to be in the movie to begin with. But aside from that, the story follows along, pretty much as it should. It looks absolutely gorgeous. I think it might be a tick too long, probably because of that soldier story.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially when he resurfaces. But I can't say that the movie ever drags. So I'm a little bit above you guys. I give it a B+. Justin, it's interesting that it is from the same guy that did The Hunt, because I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
but I get Farmer Oak confused, because I've seen him in things before. I get him confused with dude from The Hunt that's in Hannibal.
Yeah.
I thought it was the same guy until I saw his name.
Well, if he shaved, he looked just like him.
There's one thing that was bothering me while I was watching it that I wanted to throw out to you guys as well. How did you feel about the pacing of this movie?
Well, like I said, I didn't think it dragged at all. I think it's maybe a little long, but I was never bored with it. I thought the pacing was okay. Why do you ask? You didn't like it?
It wasn't so much that I didn't like it, it's just I felt a lot of things were really, really rushed.
I think it never got boring, but it did feel like there were certain segments in the story that felt like they were just kind of merged together. Like, there's the party scene that goes on maybe a little too long, or this one sequence where she's working at the beginning, which is instantaneous practically. Like, Not everything was quite as spaced out, maybe, as it could have been.
No, I feel like if they just fleshed out certain segments, this would have been so much better.
Probably.
Well, they could have easily done that if they had taken out the soldier subplot and made it a love triangle instead of a love rhombus. That's, I think...
Well done, sir.
Thank you. I think that's where you put in that extra information and lengthen some of those scenes, some of those plot lines, because he is a pretty big part of the movie for the first two-thirds of it, probably.
Yeah, and then they just sort of like sparingly use Michael Sheen, which is odd.
That's a crime.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, because
He's always good.
I kept waiting for his character to do more.
Yes.
We don't get it until the big climax.
That scene towards the end with the two of them at dinner, I think is maybe the best scene in the movie.
I'd agree with that.
I mean, it doesn't have the cinematography of, some of the other scenes. But the subtlety is...
It's got some great subtlety.
Yeah, it does.
And that's the best thing about his performance is, like, the scene where he's just kind of coming back after a rejection. Mm-hmm. It's just like, you can tell this guy's hurting even though he's barely saying anything.
Well, and it's pretty much the most important scene for her character.
It's kind of like, well, I think we understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and they understand her the way she is.
Yeah, I definitely could have used more of that.
Mm-hmm. Which you would have had more if not for Crazy Soldier, who...
Right.
I'm not saying you had to take him out of the movie entirely, because I feel like there could have been an interesting subplot, but he shouldn't have been like her romantic...
Or just find some way to tie him in better, instead of just, oh, well, the girl I was supposed to marry is out of the picture now, so...
I'll just randomly get with you.
I'm going to fall madly in love with Carey Mulligan now, because I'm heartbroken.
Yeah. I have nothing to add, because you're completely right. All right, well, let's move on here. We have 2 home media moments for you this week. We're going to start with Wild Card. Joe?
Wild Card is a crime thriller directed by Simon West and starring Jason Statham. No, that's Statham. Michael Agnerano, Dominic Garcia-Laredo, Mio Ventimiglia, Hope Davis, and Stanley Tucci. The film is based on the 1985 novel Heat by William Goldman and is a remake of the 1986 adaptation some people might know with Burt Reynolds. Aha!
Oh.
Yeah, I know. I didn't know until I looked it up. Nick Wilde, played by Jason Statham, is a recovering gambling addict who takes odd jobs in Vegas to support his addiction. He never wants to get out, even though he does want to get out. It's kind of difficult. He accepts a job from a self-made millionaire named Cyrus, played by Michael Angarano, to show him around Vegas and provide him with protection while he gambles. Now, while eating at a diner, there's this waitress there named Holly who asks him to stop at her house, and it turns out she was beaten up by some crazy gangsters, and she wants revenge, and Jason Statham kind of gets tugged into the madness, and there's all kinds of violence that ensues. I think that the one thing it does well is the sense of what it is like to be a gambling addict, because the one scene I remember from recalling the movie specifically is the scene where he really wants to get out of Vegas, and so he actually proves that he can gamble well, and he has the opportunity to get out, but he can't stop himself, loses everything, he's still stuck in Vegas. So you do get a good sense that this character is really stuck, which I do think that Statham conveys fairly well. But that's pretty much the only good thing about it, is that sense, because the movie, well, there are 2 issues with it. It wants to create a lot of tension, but when you've got Jason Statham, who is, the epic martial artist he is, nothing that comes against him here seems like a real legitimate threat. You're never worried about him, which is a big issue when you're really wanting to create suspense. The second problem is, for a movie that has Jason Statham in it, there's very little action.
Yeah.
And the action that's actually in it is horrible. It's horribly choreographed and edited. Now, I do think there's some good gore here, which I was surprised about. And so I feel like there is an element of gritty atmosphere with the seedy crime Vegas element, which I do kind of naturally like. I think some of the atmosphere is right there. I think Statham's okay. But the story is mostly weak, and the action's practically non-existent. So I'm going to leave this one with a D+.
Justin, Wild Card.
I feel like in the right hands, Wild Card may have been an interesting escapist neo-noir.
Good pun.
In the hands of director Simon West, who made such great films as The Expendables 2.
God, that's the worst of the Expendables movies.
It's near incoherent dribble. West can't seem to decide what story to tell, so instead presents 3 ideas, with one moderately interesting, I would argue the revenge story that ends probably about a third of the way into the movie.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, too.
Which is interesting, but unfortunately it's littered with a lot of wooden acting, and I think you said it perfectly, Joe, terrible fight sequences, and the other 2 are just downright generic. There's a couple interesting guest appearances. I wouldn't even call them stars. They're basically just cameos. They're fun. Like, hey, you're in this, but that's about it. Now, I'll give Jason Statham credit. He's doing everything he can to try and keep this movie up afloat.
He actually is.
But there is no excuse to have this much star power in one movie and give them absolutely nothing to do with material this shoddy. I leave Wildcard with a D.
Yeah, why is Stanley Tucci even in this movie?
Because
First of all,
crazy cameo.
All right, well, it is
basically.
The whole movie is just completely generic. It's unimaginative. I think Statham's all right. He is better here than I've seen him in some things, but honestly, he's just sleepwalking through this thing. It's Statham being true to form, in a lot of these movies that he's sort of known for. Vegas as the backdrop is surprisingly boring. I don't know how you make Vegas
Ridiculously
boring,
Well,
but
that's
they did
because
it.
most of it's filmed like at the diner where you look at a brick wall for most of the back. That's where
That
most.
is- yeah.
And inside of one hotel, that's most of Vegas.
Yeah.
Great.
So who cares? And you're right. You're both right. The action is non-existent, and also very boring when it does exist. The cameos are not. I mean, Sofia Vergara adds nothing.
Yeah.
Cool, she's in it
for about
but
2 minutes.
For about a couple minutes. Just everything about it is just as generic as you can get. I can't say it wasn't trying to do something, but yeah, I'm with you, Joe. It's a D plus. I don't think it's quite as bad as a D, but it's just it doesn't. There's no life in it. Is the problem?
It's never going anywhere.
I will say though, there was some gore to it.
They're pretty
I
intense.
turned away a
gore.
couple times.
Like that's the one interesting kind of thing about the fight scenes was instead of doing like this really fast stuff Jason Statham does, it was like they're trying to be a little more realistic, and they had slow motion where you could see what actually happens. And I was kind of impressed by that, but I didn't really like the way that it looked.
It's just really bad CGI.
It's kind of bad CGI, kind of fuzzy. I know they were trying to go for like kind of this gritty 70s thing.
And they're trying to pull up this whole like, oh, he doesn't use a gun, then why not have him use stuff that would actually make sense to cause a lot of damage?
I don't know, man. It's like, I think there were like only a couple scenes. And like I said, you just aren't really afraid for him because the bad guys are kind of a joke.
There's very little tension in this movie. But it all sort of begs this interesting question because we all brought up these cameos that really serve no purpose in the movie, could be played by anyone.
I liked...
Is there such a deluge now of movies that you can have Stanley Tucci be in this movie for 2 minutes and you can boast starring Sofia Vergara and Stanley Tucci, even though their characters had nothing, could be played by anyone, and they probably worked 4 hours on the movie.
Oh yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of these, and they come up a lot in home media moments because they don't get these wide theatrical releases, but a lot of our home media moments we'll have like one or two main stars, and then we'll see a lot of these random cameos. I mean, Justin Long in that movie, Ask Me Anything.
Yeah,
he's billed in the top, 3 or 4 people. He's really barely in the movie.
he's got maybe 10 minutes of screen time.
And I feel like that's popping up a lot, and it's
how people promote their movies.
Brand association.
Yeah, it is, but I don't know. I'm getting a bit
sick of it.
Yeah, it's a bit overkill with it.
Well, I'm glad you
It
thought
just seems like
Statham
a
could
really-
kind of act this time.
He was all right.
It's like it's not quite false advertising, but at the same time, it kind of is because you're building it up and they're not there that much.
Right.
Honestly, I saw this movie called Wild Card, and I knew Stanley Tucci was just going to be in a cameo. I wasn't really like expecting.
I didn't know he was in it at all. I just knew Jason Statham, and the preview had Sofia Vergara in it, so I knew she was in it.
I also believe the trailer brought up Jason Alexander, who has maybe 2 scenes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Right.
That's right. Yeah,
I forgot about him entirely.
He was like the agent guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he was pretty good in it.
I guess.
It's
really.
It's wild card. Let's just be real here.
Yeah.
Hey, these are trying.
No. No, they weren't.
Kind of.
All right. Well, up next, we have our second home media moment, and that is the tale of the Princess Kaguya, and Justin's going to talk about that.
When a woodcutter, played by James Caan in the English dub, discovers a young girl identified as a princess, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, hidden within a stalk of bamboo, he and his wife take it upon themselves to raise her as their own. However, as the girl rapidly grows up, the woodcutter takes her to the capital to fulfill her role, much to her own chagrin. While anime is certainly not for everyone, there's still something to be said for both outstanding animation and solid storytelling. Kaguya, for the most part, has both at its disposal. Although it's certainly on the lengthy side at about 2 hours and 17 minutes, I really loved that there was some beautiful hand-drawn animation that seamlessly brings a well-known Japanese fairy tale to life, but in a way that I feel is incredibly accessible. Though I feel like the biggest flaw with that though is the English dub cast is a little bit 50-50. Moretz is great, but some of the others I feel are just not quite up to par, and some don't always have their best moments to shine. I feel like Lucy Liu has some okay moments as Kaguya's mentor, but just doesn't get nearly enough time to flesh out.
I think Khan and Steenburgen were great, though.
For what their role entailed. They're a little bit MIA come Act 2, but they do tie in well with the main story, which I really did like. However, I do think it does take a little bit of time to get going, but The Tale of the Princess Kaguya still has more than enough merits to warrant the Best Animated Feature nomination it received. I leave it with a B+.
Yeah, it looks like nothing else out there. The hand-painted watercolor is both to its success and detriment, though. It looks beautiful, yes, but it looks a little bit pale and washed out, and also because I'm sure it's so painstaking to do, we get very little in the way of background in a lot of these scenes. You know, I don't know what the solution is, because it's eye-catching because it doesn't look like anything else, but because of the way it's drawn, I don't think we get as much detail as I would have liked. The story is great, though. It's a great romance tale. Little Bamboo is an extraordinary heroine. I love her. The movie has humor and emotion, but the realism of the characters and the story is what is most striking about the film. I'm with you, Justin, that the cast in the English dub is not all there, but part of my problem was actually with Moretz. I don't think she gives this character as much life as she deserves.
I agree.
Do you?
Some lines I thought she was good. Other times I'm like, wow, this is Chloe Grace Moretz in a booth somewhere.
And I'm very disappointed by that, because this is now the second movie in a month that I've been disappointed with Moretz's performance. The other one being The Clouds of Sils Maria, which I admit her character was horribly written, so I can't blame it on her specifically, but
I was going to say,
I have come to expect a lot more from her, and I didn't think she did all that great here, given the character. So, for that, and the fact that it is about 15-20 minutes too long, I actually leave it with a B. Joe?
Now, I agree that it might be a little too long, and the thing that's interesting about the animation is that it is very unique, and it does have that kind of, that ancient Japanese kind of inked style, and I do agree that there is less background sometimes. Sometimes there are good backgrounds, though.
But it depends on the scene.
Like when they're in the country, the backgrounds are great.
Yes.
oh yeah. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing per se.
No.
But I mean, in a character-driven piece, you got to have the performances shine, which
Oh, yeah.
I feel like is a blessing and a curse in this regard. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're right. It's fine. I definitely think the best thing about it is the core story and the characters. It's kind of funny. The only two negatives I had for the movie were that maybe it was slightly long. The animation was beautiful, and it's a very unique style. The style wasn't one that I particularly like. I like more solid animation with more detail. Honestly, more traditional anime. Even more traditional Miyazaki films, I tend to like more of. But that's just a personal preference thing. I still thought it was gorgeous to behold. And I thought that, I do agree, the best thing about it is that despite having this very mystical edge, bringing this classical mythology to life, it had such grounded, real characters. And I really did think that most of the voice cast did a great job. I think Moretz did do well some of the time, but not quite all as much as she could have done. Mm-hmm. There were a couple line reads, but it honestly depended on the scene. Overall, though, I thought it was a fantastic film. If it had been a little shorter and maybe an art style that I would have liked more, I probably have maybe thought it was perfect. I actually leave it with an A.
Wow, very good. Even with an animation style you don't really care for.
No, I was saying that's definitely personal preference. I don't like that animation style, but I could sense the artwork in it. It still looked good.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, if I had done this movie, it would have looked more like Miyazaki's traditional stuff,
Standard Ghibli.
Standard Ghibli, more solid, less sketching, just more vibrant backgrounds and detail.
Right.
More realism generally. But I really liked some of the sequences. Like it's just amazing how much you can convey with animation. Like the scene where she gets really, really upset and she decides to just leave and she just flees into the woods and she's kind of like going back into her natural state and everything just kind of becomes muted and just basic colors. Like that was very impressive. So just for the animation alone and the story, I mean, it's fantastic.
The style of animation reminds me, though, of Ernest and Celestine. Because that was a very different style of animation. It looked more like a kid's storybook.
Yeah.
And because of that, we didn't get a lot in the way of backgrounds, like in this. But for some reason in that, it didn't quite bother me as much. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. Maybe, I don't know, maybe because the environment of this movie I wanted to see more of and more from, and I didn't quite get that. Whereas in Ernest and Celestine, it was pretty basic, street scenes or, their house or whatever.
It worked for what it was.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I'm a little bit torn on my general feelings about Moretz in this movie. She's trying to play out of place, I think. But at the same time, that leads to some scenes really coming to life, particularly in her trying to accept her role. But other scenes where she's just kind of monotone, I guess might be the choice word.
But then again, that's kind of the character she's playing sometimes, is when she's depressed, she is kind of monotone.
Yeah, so it sort of becomes a matter of, is it that she gives a bad performance, or is it a matter of she's trying to commit to the role of the character?
And direction.
And general direction.
Yeah.
Maybe because honestly, some scenes you could tell flowed better. Like, I really had a hard time picking her out of voice. And other times, I was like, wow, that's totally you.
Right.
And where most of the other voice actors I thought were more seamless. Like, honestly...
Steenburgen, I didn't really know that was her for a long time. I was trying to figure out... I actually thought it was Tina Fey.
You know what? I thought Lucy Liu actually did a good job.
Yeah,
I didn't recognize her voice.
Recognize her voice at all. I thought she did a really good job.
That's actually one really cool thing I like about the Ghibli English dubs, is a lot of them do have well-known actors. Tina Fey, actually, one of them.
Yes, I know, from Ponyo, right?
Yes. But they do really try to go out of their way to at least sort of cover it up, so you don't simply think of it as that's a Joseph Gordon-Levitt movie for The Wind Rises, or it's Shia LaBeouf and Nausicaa.
But I think it's fun to go into the English dubs of these movies without knowing who's playing what.
That too.
And trying to guess, because they always do get these really famous actors and actresses to do the role. And when we saw The Wind Rises, it was fun for me to try and pick out who was who. That's
actually why with these films, I'm actually okay with running the English dub instead of traditional Japanese. Because you can clearly tell that there was some dedication trying to figure out who's going to play what character and how they're going to commit to it in that regard.
Yeah, they're clearly not just throwing it together and saying, let's have a bunch of famous people. They're trying to pick out who they think will be good for the character, which I definitely appreciate. All right, so before we get to our triple feature of older films, a quick news item to run by you guys. We'll talk about this a little bit. More... no, a different animated series from the 60s. Jonny Quest this time, looking for a live-action reboot, and Robert Rodriguez has apparently teamed up with Warner Brothers to make this happen. Now, I am not super familiar with Jonny Quest. I've seen a few episodes when I was a lot younger. Wasn't really my thing. But I do like Robert Rodriguez when he does kids' movies, so I'm definitely intrigued as to what it's going to be. Is it going to be a kids' movie, or is it going to be more of a PG-13 superhero-y kind of take on it?
See it.
Or is it going to be more like a Spy Kids PG?
I would guess Spy Kids-esque.
So what do you guys think of this? Are you fans of Jonny Quest? You've seen it? You're familiar?
Much like you, I saw a couple episodes when I was really, really young. I can't tell you too much about how I felt about it, but I do remember liking it. So I'm definitely not against the idea. There are just two central concerns that worry me about this. One is the fact that Robert Rodriguez is lately on a downslope, so I'd really hate to see this go downhill. Especially with this, it's a very dated cartoon, so you'd have to tweak what is going to make sense in the modern day and what isn't.
Speed Racer.
Exactly.
My least favorite.
Thank you, Dan. The other big thing is, when it comes to Rodriguez and kids movies, we have the first 2 Spy Kids movies, which for the most part were pretty good. And then there's everything else. Shorts.
I love Shorts. It's such a good movie.
Dan's in the minority, but
I am.
But
I'm
most people
okay
think
with
it's pretty
it.
bad. Shark Boy and Lava Girl, need we say more?
I never saw that one, but I bet I would like it.
I mean, adapting a classic 60s cartoon, I thought Jonny Quest was okay from what little I saw, but I actually think I liked the remake of the show a little better.
Like the 80s version.
It was like the 80s or 90s or something. I think I saw a couple episodes of that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus Venture Brothers, which is kind of a spoof on all that stuff I like, so I kind of dig that sort of thing. The problem is, for me personally, I like Robert Rodriguez when he does like Desperado and stuff like that. Like, he's pretty good at action. I saw the first Spy Kids movie, and I didn't like it.
Oh.
So,
And you were a kid at the time.
and I was a kid at the time, so
That doesn't bode well.
if he makes Jonny Quest in that vein, I don't know if I'd like it. I'd kind of like him to do probably something that's a little more mature, maybe.
Okay, so you would prefer like a PG-13 type.
Well,
Remake
the reason I
or
liked you
reboot.
suggesting that, Dan, is because I'd like Rodriguez to do something different. Because usually he does like these really over-the-top action movies, or he does these kind of
Yeah, it's one or the other.
kids movies. I want him to try and do something different for once, because he's been kind of hammering one or the other for like the last 20 years.
That is interesting.
Just
You're right.
do
He
something
only
different.
has 2 modes, and they're sort of polar opposites of each other, but they're
Blend 'em.
both his wheelhouse.
Yeah. So
So-
maybe you can do a little bit of both here and provide a different movie.
Well, I'm curious to see who the audience is going to be for this movie, because Jonny Quest does have a pretty big like cult following, but I don't know for who. I mean, they run it on like Boomerang and stuff,
Yeah.
but are kids watching it, or I don't get Boomerang? Do they run it at 1 in the morning, and so adults watch it?
I don't
You
think
know.
That
it's...
I don't know.
I don't
I would
thi-
assume early morning.
I do feel like it's kind of one of those things where if you were a kid in the 60s, you probably really liked it, and that's kind of what's kept it alive.
That's what I mean. But are those people showing it to their kids? Are they buying the DVDs of the seasons and showing it to their kids, or are they the ones who are going to be going to the movie?
Oh, well, no, I think they'd probably they want to market it towards everybody or a younger crowd.
Right.
But it's Jonny Quest, which is very retro.
Well, it's sort of
Yeah.
my problem with Gem and the Holograms, which we have not discussed on the show yet, but that's going to be coming out later this year. I don't understand who that movie is for.
Yeah.
I grew up with Gem and the Holograms in the 80s, and I don't know one single person who is at all excited about that movie.
It's not Transformers.
But
or
it was
He-Man.
cool back in the day.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with the Gem and the Holograms movie is it's not Gem and the Holograms. It's just a completely different storyline.
Yes, I know. Well, that is another problem entirely. But, I mean, it would be like making a Beverly Hills Teens movie. Like, yes, people have heard of that show.
Dun, dun,
And
dun, dun, dun,
they,
dun,
it's
dun,
one of Joe's favorites growing
I
up.
watched a couple episodes.
You know,
Yeah, it's actually
but if
kind of entertaining.
They made a movie. Like, who is that movie for? I don't know who's going to see Gem and the Holograms. I'm not sure who is going to see Jonny Quest if they make it a PG Spy Kids E type movie.
To be honest, I've met some fairly nostalgic Jonny Quest fans over the years. I know my mom was a huge fan growing up, and when I was like 5, she was like, "Oh, you gotta watch this."
And would she go see this movie?
Hard to say, no.
I mean, right? That's the question.
Yeah, sure.
But
I like Gem and the Holograms as a kid, but I'm not excited to see that.
nah. Though I've debated watching a few episodes before they comes out.
The problem with Jonny Quest is it's not like Ninja Turtles where they keep it going. It's
Right.
it's always with us in some way, or Spider-Man or something. It's kind of had a couple variations, but it's very rooted in where it originally was.
Right.
Come
I
out with like
agree.
a new version every couple of years, and
Might help. Maybe could they advertise like a new cartoon or something to kind of boost interest again?
I don't know. They could. I mean, we've seen it work both ways. I mean, Peabody and Sherman, I don't think kids were familiar with really at all,
I wasn't.
unless their parents introduced them, to it. Right? You guys weren't, and that did pretty well. Wasn't a blockbuster, but it did well enough for the studio.
There you go.
But then we get some like I don't know, like the Yogi Bear live action movie.
did not need
Where
to
it's
happen.
like, okay, why is this movie happening? I mean, I thought it was okay. It did all right at the box office, but those old cartoons can sort of go either way. So it'll be interesting to see.
You know what? It's good you brought up Peabody and Sherman though, because once again,
What a movie.
Good movie. I never heard of it. I only knew the character from that one scene in The Simpsons, the Quiet You thing.
Right.
So I figured that out from that. But no idea who it was. But obviously, there was enough of a fandom and enough people to get their kids to come see it just because it's a kids movie to bring interest in it. So,
Right.
So I bet they're a lot more.
But it was a
DVDs sold.
cartoon.
That's
This
probably
is
the
going to
first
be
thing.
live action, which I think complicates it a little bit.
If it was if it was animated, that would be.
I agree.
That would be better. You know
Yeah.
what they should do? They should have done Jonny Quest 2D style. They should have done it. They should do that to make
I'd
it
be
stand
alright with
out. That would be cool. I'd be down for that.
Oh yeah.
No Pixar 3D
Yeah.
CGI like everything.
Or at the very least, make it look like the new Peanuts movie, which is CGI but
Modeled.
looks
But
very retro.
paying homage to the original source material.
There you go.
Exactly. So that would be one way to go as well. All right, well, let's get into our triple feature of older films here. We've got my pick for old classic coming up, The Craft, and a very popular recent Oscar-nominated film, The Aviator. But first up is Star Trek Into Darkness, a film that came out just months before our first episode, so we've never really gotten to talk about it on the show. So, Joe, let's hear about the new classic Star Trek Into Darkness.
The film that's missing a colon
Yes.
because they're taking a Star Trek Into Darkness. It's a 2013 American science fiction action film, and it is the 12th installment in the Star Trek film franchise and the sequel to the 2009 reboot that got everybody talking, both good and bad. The film was directed by J.J. Abrams again before he left for Star Wars. The screenplay was written by Roberto Orci, who is also kind of controversial for what he's done to Star Trek. The plot of Into Darkness takes place 1 year after the original film, with Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise sent to the Klingon homeworld seeking a former Starfleet member turned terrorist named John Harrison. But it's Khan. Everybody knew it was Khan. So if you haven't seen the movie, I'm sorry, it's Khan. Spoilers. If you didn't, everybody knew.
I think they know by now if they didn't
If
before.
you didn't know, Benedict Cumberbatch, plays this guy in the most poorly attempted thing. Now Star Trek Into Darkness is kind of an interesting movie to talk about because it's not as good as the first movie, but it is trying to tell a more serious, cerebral story, kind of, which is a little more in the vein of Star Trek, but barely so, to be honest. I think it's still an action movie first. But, the actors, we have Chris Pine here, we have Zachary Quinto, Carl Urban. I mean, we still have a lot of great performers bringing these classic characters to life and doing a pretty good job of it. I mean, the film flows well. The action's pretty good. I remember the 3D was pretty decent for it when it came out. Mm-hmm. So there were some good things about it that stood out to me. The biggest problem, though, and I think that everybody kind of agrees with it, is that if you've seen Wrath of Khan, they were really pretending like this wasn't going to be the Wrath of Khan, and
Until he was.
it has elements that makes it kind of a different movie, but really not. I mean, the main villain's Khan, it's centered around it, it's very similar to the story. They kind of combine the original episode with the Wrath of Khan, and obviously there's a few plot details missed, but they literally take scenes and redo them. Now, when I first saw the movie, I thought, okay, this is kind of an homage, but they obviously really wanted to just kind of do the Wrath of Khan again and pretend like they weren't, which made some people upset. Now, like I said, Cumberbatch, was he the best casting? I don't know, but I think he does a pretty good job to try and make the character different. The biggest issue with me, though, is that with these new Star Trek films, Star Trek, I believe, can be action-oriented, it can be fun, but first and foremost, Star Trek is cerebral. It's about thought, it's about honest discussions about morality and politics and science and everything. And I feel like Star Trek needs to be smart again, and this one at least was trying, but it didn't have quite as much of the fun or balance of the first film. And my issues with it, aside from fandom, with Khan and everything, I try to be kind of fair, but I'm going to leave this one with a B+. And I know this one was like on my top 20 originally, but to be fair, Justin, I think I saw half the movies in 2013.
Yeah, we were only doing a show for like 4 months.
And I will admit, that the thing that's interesting is that I do get into these Star Trek movies really when I see them, but the more I think about them, it's kind of like Nolan's movies. I tend to have more problems in retrospect.
Interesting.
Like, for me, guys, I'm sorry. I'm happy these films have gotten people interested in Star Trek again and bringing some new life, but I'm happy they're thinking about bringing a new series and continuing it on TV, which I think it's best for, honestly. Mm-hmm. And, let's make Star Trek smart again. I'm sorry, that is the biggest problem, and now with the director of the newest film from the Fast and Furious franchise, I don't think we're going closer to that direction. So,
hard to say.
I do agree that Trek works best on television.
It does.
I do agree with that. But I think that this is a worthy follow-up to the reboot. You're absolutely right. It's not quite as good. Mm-hmm. I thought the first one that Abrams did was fantastic. But I do think the cast works together even better here. Mm-hmm. I think they've found a good chemistry. The humor, I think, is better than in the first one. I think that the final fight sequence at the end is good. But in general, the movie is a little too long and everything wraps up a little too neatly. This is obviously a franchise. It's a series. It's okay to kind of end it on a little bit, not a cliffhanger per se, but maybe not wrap everything up. I think Nimoy's cameo here, rest in peace, but it's completely unnecessary. The first one was great to have him because it was sort of like this passing of the torch, this give you my blessing kind of thing.
And then he completely contradicts his entire motivation from the original film.
I know, it's just it really is a shame. I understand, let's bring him back. He's the only one from the original cast to really give his approval in the film, but it's just not necessary here. I think they could have branched out a bit from the Khan character as well. Joe, obviously, I'm not as versed in the Trek universe as you are. Obviously, he's a classic, but I think there's a lot of other stories we haven't seen at all on the big screen yet.
Well,
in any of the Star Trek movies that they could have done.
Well, two things, Dan. First of all, in the original series, there are a lot of cool episodes you could do follow-up to.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Like, I will come... Like, even one of my favorites is the Gorn episode. There's a resolution with that. Yeah. We're going to come back eventually and help you guys. Let's find out what they've got to say.
What happened?
Just a good example there. Or, God forbid, an original story with an original villain. If you're going to copy something, why copy the safest thing you could possibly copy? Right. The most successful Trek film. Doesn't speak from confidence, guys.
But that being said, unlike remaking, I don't know, let's say Poltergeist, which stinks as a remake, this is a good movie. I mean, if you never saw Wrath of Khan, which, to be honest, I haven't. I've seen parts of it.
Okay.
I know the basics, but I've never seen the movie on the whole.
That's a shame.
So, for me, it is more action-driven than I think Trek needs to be. I agree with you there.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. And the first one was, too. But as a standalone movie, I think it's very enjoyable. And despite my few complaints about it, I actually give it a little higher than you. It's an A- for me.
Okay.
Justin? Which is what I gave it originally as well.
Okay, so it still holds up pretty well for you.
Yep, but the first one's an A for me. That was like in my top 10 of the year, I believe.
Well, I mean, director Abrams found a way to revitalize Star Trek by, I would argue, making it more accessible to outside audiences. So why he's overly drawing from the original series to do that is beyond me. Now, directors lie all the time in Hollywood, but when a film like this is a far better villain when it's not somebody from the original series. My favorite scene in the entire movie is actually when we're first introduced to Benedict Cumberbatch's character, because he's not something we've seen before. He just seems like this ordinary guy who's completely insane. Why not run with that? That was a really cool idea. And they just say, nope. Now, to be fair, the cast does have a lot of fun with the material. Although it never gets away from Wrath of Khan. Ever. The visuals are great, and the action, particularly the final chase scene,
it's great.
It's wonderful stuff. But instead of expanding on a new and I think interesting universe filled with a lot of potential, Star Trek Into Darkness just lacks confidence in trying to become a franchise. And that really worries me about where they may be heading with the third movie. I still stand on my B.
Boy, if anything, I think this movie is overly confident.
I'd agree with you, but I feel like the reason they're trying to ride on Wrath of Khan's coattails is because they're not confident.
Like I said, that's kind of something pretty obvious to lean on. Like, gee, what are we going to do for our next movie? Let's just, base it off of the most successful Trek movie.
Because we can.
And don't get me wrong, I like the things they're hinting on in this movie. Like, obviously, the next movie will deal more with the Klingons.
Right.
Which is cool, a Klingon war.
It's classic.
That's great. If you're going to go classic, that's fine, and you can do something different. But it kind of feels to me like I bet the third movie, this one will be almost inconsequential.
You think?
I don't think it's really going to matter. The most interesting aspect of this movie is the actual villain.
Right.
Which is RoboCop, Peter Weller.
That's true. It has two villains, which is even more irritating.
Weller's pretty good in this.
Weller actually does a good job as the Rogue Admiral, which is actually kind of a cool throwback, also subtly for fans for Deep Space Nine, the covert group that actually works outside the Federation. So, once again, kind of leaning on things but expanding on them.
Right.
So, I mean, the Klingon hints were the most interesting thing about the movie. You're thinking, what's this building up to? But it just feels like a segue. Honestly, a good comparison, I think, is Age of Ultron.
Okay.
I don't think Age of Ultron really would matter that much. A lot of stuff happens, but Was it really going to matter for the rest of it? I don't know.
All right, well, let's move into the old classic, and it was my pick this week, and I chose The Craft. This is a 1996 horror thriller starring Fairuza Balk, Nev Campbell, and Rachel True as three LA high school witches who are looking for a fourth for their coven when Sarah Bailey, played by Robin Tunney, moves into town to complete that circle. Each girl has their own enemy or hurdle to jump, so they join forces to take them all on, but power goes to the original trio's heads, especially Nancy, Balk's character, and their spells are coming back on them threefold. It's directed by Andrew Fleming, one of my favorite guilty pleasure directors, with films like Threesome, Hamlet 2, and Nancy Drew under his belt. I personally would not call The Craft a guilty pleasure, but I can see it if somebody did. To me, though, it's one of the great high school films of the 90s. This was released when I was a sophomore in college, and it really spoke to me and my friends. Being outcasts, wishing we could put bullies in their plays, our fascination at the time with the occult, the kick-ass alternative rock songs. The entire movie basically is like the soundtrack to the summer of '96 for me. This was me and my friends' jam. So with many of our old classic picks, I go into this review with a little bit of a bias, probably more than a lot of the other films I've picked. But, there is a reason that there was a bit of an internet uproar the other week when it was announced there might be a remake in the works. No. It holds a special place in a lot of outcasts and alternatines' hearts. It is corny. The effects are very dated. As I'm sure Joe will point out as well, there is a huge MacGuffin in the occult shopkeeper. But for me, it honestly all works. I give it an A-. Now, before we go to Justin, Joe, you've mentioned MacGuffins a couple times on this show. So let's explain for the uninitiated what a MacGuffin is. This is something dating back to the Hitchcock days.
Yeah, a MacGuffin is just an object, or honestly could just be a subject of something that simply serves to move the plot forward. And it can be something that's very well defined and usually isn't very well defined. Mm-hmm. And this particular instance with The Craft, it's basically their little store where anytime they need to get into trouble to learn about spells or miraculously find something to counteract a spell or get help from some demon or some god, they just go to the store.
They go to her and she explains what's happening.
The lady that works there, she just serves to literally move the plot forward. They come to a hurdle, which is generally considered to be lazy writing. But then again, when it's basic and it works, it can just be fun. I don't get hurt on MacGuffins. I think they're funny, honestly, but they do exist.
That's the MacGuffin.
Exactly.
I mean, best contemporary example I can think of is Guardians of the Galaxy, Evil Purple Stone of Death.
Or, honestly, sometimes MacGuffins can be fine, like Pulp Fiction, Golden Suitcase. Don't know what it is, but connects things, and it's enough,
You're right.
So, no, it's fine, but it's just something that's really obvious, and it's kind of cheesy.
Mm-hmm. Justin, let's hear from you about The Craft.
As I ask why remake Poltergeist in the 21st century, I as well ask why remake The Craft, although for very different reasons. Is it scary? No. Is it creepy? Kinda. Is it funny? A little bit. The Craft mostly plays out as a very 90s thriller-ish with moments of dark humor that are only really effective about half the time. Though with that said, it does have some good effects for the time period, and the storyline honestly never does get boring. Mm-mm. And I think you said it perfectly, Dan. It has a fantastic soundtrack.
Yeah, it does.
But there's nothing about this film to me that even remotely explains its cult following, or why there's any reason to attempt doing a remake.
Damn.
It covers its material in an interesting way, but it just is sort of there. For that, I guess I'll leave it with a C. It's not bad, but I can't really call it good either.
Oh, wow.
I definitely think it has scary moments. Joe, what did you think of The Craft?
I didn't think it was really that scary. There were some moments that were kind of creepy. I like some of the curses that they opposed with people. Mm-hmm. For me, generally atmosphere is a pretty big factor with movies, and if a movie has a good atmosphere, even if the plot isn't that great, I tend to like it. Like if it sucks me into the world that way, and I think The Craft has that in abundance. It definitely does feel very 90s. Feels very punk and goth. But, I dug it. I've actually it's kind of one of those movies that I saw a little bit on TV and I never wanted to actually watch it, but I knew people that liked it. I understand the cult following. I know people that like The Craft. I think the thing that surprised me the most about the movie was that it actually had some pretty intense subject matter that it dealt with. In the schools, honestly...
Racism.
The racism totally threw me. It seemed just something that I just was really surprised about. it has some it's a fairly basic story. It has some hurdles. It has the MacGuffin, obviously. It can be kind of cheesy, but I found it to be very entertaining, and I liked the core story and the magic behind it. I just didn't like how they were trying to kind of develop these characters, and towards the end they don't. Like, I kind of thought that they were semi-human, but then towards the end they just get so absorbed by their evil they become almost two-dimensional again. So I kind of wish they'd come for a circle there, whereas the ending, it's kind of like it wraps up a little too neatly, I think, and
Easily.
and easily. And I wish it had kind of a little more of a amazing climax.
Okay.
But for the most part, though, I liked where it was going, and I did enjoy it. Had a lot of atmosphere and was fun. I leave it with a B.
Okay.
I thought it was a good time.
I do agree that the whole movie has this very spooky atmosphere to it.
A little bit, yeah.
You know, I can agree with that. When I saw this, now keep in mind I didn't watch a lot of horror movies growing up. When I saw this in theaters, I was pretty scared by the climax at her house. I thought that was, pretty intense.
I would say it's disturbing. It gets
It's disturbing, yes. It's creepy.
I'm not denying there's a definite creep factor. It's just, is it really scary?
Well, creepiness,
I'm not so sure.
Disturbing, getting under your skin, that's a type of fear. That's unsettling is sometimes worse than just being, oh my god, it's scary for like a second, then you forget about it.
Well, like I said, I mean, this is a horror thriller. It's not, I wouldn't say horror is the
main thing.
Certainly the only focus. I mean, it's the thriller, and it does have some dark comedy elements as well.
No, the scariest thing are the characters themselves, and that you don't really know what's going on with them. They kind of turn monstrous, and they seem...
Yeah, I think Nancy is a scary character.
Like, Frieza Bulk seems crazy and frightening, and that's what's disturbing, is you don't know what she's going to do. Not necessarily all the snakes and stuff. I mean, that was cool.
Yeah.
But the scariness comes from these characters, I think.
Which would be interesting if there was build up to that. Instead, it's just more or less gimmick after gimmick after gimmick. They're good practical effects, and even the scenes where they're using a bit more flashier stuff with like the book animations and things like that, which are definitely dated. But
they're dated now, but I think at the time they looked cool.
Oh yeah, easily. Don't get me wrong. There are things I did like about this movie. It's just
not many.
I didn't say there was a lot. I just said there were things. To me, it's like you're trying to accomplish being a horror film. You're just really spooky, but never really got me on the edge of my seat or my bones are chilling or I got goosebumps. It's just...
I don't think it was trying to be super scary.
Yeah, again, horror is not the only focus of this film.
I thought it was more like a teen high school...
I feel like maybe you're getting a little stuck on that part. I mean, I think it's thrillery. I think it's dark comedy-ish. I think it's like Joe said, it's got some interesting commentary about high school behaviors and bullies. And
I think the horror component, I didn't think of The Craft as a horror movie.
That part I will give you points for, Joe. I do think it does have a lot of interesting things to say about high school life. Do I buy its interpretation of high school? Absolutely not.
But I think that's why it has spoken to a lot of people, is that outcast bully component.
But then do more with that. As Joe mentioned in his review, they tackle it a little bit, and then they just sort of brush it to the side.
It's trying to do a lot of different things. You're right.
I feel like if The Craft had worked 100%, it basically would have been Heathers with Witches.
I guess that's true. I mean, Heathers is a great movie, but it also goes very far off the rails the last, 20 minutes.
It's a very different movie come the third act.
Yeah, so, I mean, The Craft at least knows what it is and does that for the whole movie.
Stays relatively consistent.
I'll give it that, but... All right, well, not for you. So up next, we have our Oscar A to Z movie, and that is The Aviator. This is a 2004 film nominated for 11 Oscars. And gentlemen, this is a feat that would not be matched until another Scorsese film, Hugo, in 2011. Not even Avatar got that many nods. It won 4 of the 5 technical awards it was nominated for, and then also nominated for 3 acting awards: Leonardo DiCaprio, Alan Alda, and Cate Blanchett, who won, and also nominated for Best Director, Original Screenplay, and Best Picture. Justin, let's hear about The Aviator.
Leonardo DiCaprio plays Howard Hughes, a man constantly trying to push the envelope in the public eye regarding both film epics and aviation. Though after fighting an uphill battle to get the proclaimed in the film war epic Hell's Angels made, as well as the as well as several disastrous aerial tests, slowly but surely driving Hughes' own obsessive compulsions into madness. Now, Howard Hughes was a larger-than-life yet mysterious figure in American pop culture, so it only makes sense that a biopic about him reflects this, which is a fact that both helps and hurts the film overall. It never feels like he's anything but larger-than-life, but at the same time, this movie's trying to do so much that, as a result, we feel like we're just seeing various chapters in his life instead of one full-fledged thing. And that wouldn't be so much of an issue if it didn't stop at around 1946. I understand that he kind of went off the grid at one point, but if you're going to do that, at least give some degree of an epilogue regarding that, which the film doesn't seem to care about. But Scorsese's trying to cram in so much that I feel like if you're going to do that, just pick one point. Like, the Hells Angels storyline is really interesting, but that's gone in about half an hour. And then we have his love life, which is also really compelling, but that's done in about 45 minutes. And then we get a whole big section about his obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is a really interesting section. I didn't like it the first time around. It really helped on a second viewing, particularly in clarifying a few things. But at the same time, it just sort of becomes... It's there, and then it's not, and then they bring it back at the end to sort of bring it all full circle, I guess. DiCaprio, yet again, turns out a great performance as Hughes, as well as his supporting cast. This movie made a Blanchett fan out of me for the first time ever. I wasn't sure how to feel about her, but after seeing a few Katharine Hepburn movies, absolutely spot on. Mm-hmm. As a result, the film only goes as far as it can go before stopping with minimal resolution at best. It's understandable given Hughes' life, but as I mentioned before, I don't think it's acceptable for a biopic. I leave The Aviator with a B+.
Joe?
I think that the massive vignettes kind of tell us a lot about this man as he's portrayed as larger than life. And I don't think that the film was necessarily about the man, more about the myth. And I think we learn something about the man through the myth, or at least the interpretation therein. Now, I really like the ending of the film. No, I think this film definitely is doing a lot, but when you're trying to tackle somebody like Howard Hughes, there's not a whole lot you can leave out. Now, they actually did choose to leave out one massive component of his life that they touch on very, very briefly, but it was probably a wise decision. Howard Hughes is known primarily for three things, besides his obsessive-compulsive disorder and everything else. There are three primary things that he was kind of career-based in. There was, as film, he was a film producer, he was an aviator, he was also an avid golfer. Seriously, that is the other major thing he's known for. He golfed a lot. And they touched on that very briefly. I think Scorsese was like, well, I can't make this that exciting. So they did touch on that. So if you're going to take something out, they cut out something wise. Considering how little is really known about him, I think they tried to bring the character to life as humanly as they could, showing this man who did have this dark secret and this disability in a time where people wouldn't understand it, being on the spotlight, but also trying to do so much with that. I think there's a lot that can be implied mostly through performances. And just the combination of the direction and the editing, it's quite a masterpiece, honestly. There isn't really too much I can say about it. I do think it might be a little disjointed by telling all those things, but how much could you cut out? I wouldn't cut it much. I just couldn't, honestly. So I understand the difficulty there. And the performances are great. I think it's hard to pick because when it comes to Scorsese especially, I love like all of Leo's performances, but I think Howard Hughes is definitely up there for me. I think the only other performance of his I might like more might be from Gangs of New York. But maybe it's just because
that's a good one.
I like the character a lot there, though. So it's tough. But this is just really good. I really just get a sense of it. And I admit you're right, Justin. Maybe an epilogue, something. But I love the way the film ends. It's haunting. I think it really shows us a lot that we suspected about the man that we kind of really see here. And just his struggle, it's kind of just seeing him on the verge. Which, admittedly, I guess if you don't know much about Hughes, you might be left wondering. But literally, the guy disappears for like 25 years, and then he comes out briefly and then dies. So, literally, we saw all the interesting stuff. Everything else is literally there's nothing. That's kind of what's scary about it. And it leaves us with nothing, which I think works, and it's haunting. But other than being maybe a little too long, which is standard Scorsese, I don't think there's anything wrong with the movie. I've always loved it. I give it an A.
Okay. I would say that in Scorsese's filmography, The Aviator lands somewhere near the top of the middle. Like most of Marty's films, the acting is top-notch. His keen eye for storytelling is front and center. But, Joe, you said it. How is it that nearly a 3-hour movie never feels overly long? And the answer is because Hughes' life was such a soap opera that it allows Scorsese to shift gears, like Justin mentioned, about 3-4 different times. Spend 45 minutes here, an hour here. DiCaprio's performance here is great. Certainly, near the top of his filmography. Maybe it's no Blood Diamond or Gilbert Grape, but it is very riveting to see this descent into and out of madness that Hughes clearly has. But Blanchett does steal pretty much every scene she's in, so it's hard to say DiCaprio is even the best one in the movie, which is rare. But as a film buff, I could have also used more time on the Hell's Angels story and his directing career, but honestly, the guy's got so much going on in his life. I'm glad we didn't touch on the golf storyline.
That's literally...
I'm fine with that.
If you look up Howard Hughes, besides OCD and Mistresses, it's like film guy, aviator, golfer.
Yeah,
I'm
fine with that being left out.
I don't know. I mean, depends on how they play it.
Well,
it seems like a boring storyline compared to everything else going on. The guy played golf. Cool.
I like Legend of Bagger Vance, but it's tough to do that, in all honesty.
It's interesting that you guys are talking about the epilogue because I agree actually with both of you. Joe, I'm fine with the way the movie ends, but I never really thought about the fact that there is no epilogue, and that might have been interesting, but it never bothered me. So it's an interesting point.
It is.
And not one that I had thought of, which means I was pretty much satisfied with how it ended. But you're right, a biopic should probably have some sort of here's what happened after the movie ends. But I'm right in between you guys. I give it an A-. You know me in the long movies. Scorsese is one of the worst offenders. But this movie, to me, it just flows so well. This is my second time through, and both times I don't think it drags at all.
No.
First time bothered me a lot more than the second.
Well, it seems like you even said in your review, I think there were some things on your first go around that you were maybe confused by or
you didn't understand
appreciate
OCD quite as much.
There were a few things about the OCD I didn't quite grasp.
So that may have dragged it down a little bit.
I liked that Cate Blanchett was getting into character, but I wasn't familiar with Katharine Hepburn.
Yeah, that would be a detractor then for sure.
Why
is the crazy lady talking like this?
Precisely,
Yeah. Oh well, yeah. That's gonna certainly affect your grade.
Yeah, I think of some of the antics Hughes goes through made me like him a lot less and less as the movie went on. I thought the madness scenes went on way too long.
Oh, I think they're so crucial.
I agree that they're crucial, but at the time that was like they just kept going and going and going, and then
like OCD.
We come back briefly.
It's true.
We come back briefly to cap it off with the Spruce Goose, and then we're back to square two.
Well, I thought the Spruce Goose was a good capper because hey, he got it to fly. He proved he could do it. He proved his word. I liked that.
And Alan Alda finally shut up.
And got served. Right? And got served.
Yeah, he got served hardcore.
And that was the scene I actually really liked on the second viewing. Question about the aviation scene for you two gentlemen. How do you feel about the use of CGI for it?
The final scene, you mean?
I believe both use CGI. I mean, all the flying scenes use some degree of CGI.
Because they were staying fairly simple, and it obviously was pretty well done, I thought it was pretty good CGI. It didn't bother me too much. However, especially with the Hell's Angels sequence, I was thinking, so, this movie was made in the 20s, and it has more impressive special effects than what you're doing to model it.
Yeah.
I was thinking, like, this is obviously fake when they actually did real stunts.
I agree that would have been really cool.
To almost redo that.
But at the same time, I don't know how logistically one might pull that off, because in the 20s and 30s when they were making Hell's Angels, there weren't really any airplanes in the sky. I feel like they would need an incredibly large airspace to do all of that. No, I don't know how feasible that would be.
I would love that, and I would say, hey, do it, but you'd be spending as much as Howard Hughes did, almost, which would be almost as bad as doing it back then, and just to kind of prove, wow, this is what he did with Hell's Angels. We got the point. It still looked good.
I admit that it didn't look amazing, though.
It looked fake,
Yeah.
But it looked on a big...
Looked all right.
In an epic way,
I mean, honestly, the scene where he is actually up in the sky filming Hell's Angels the first time is honestly one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie. I love the way it's shot. Does the CGI bother me a smidge? Yes, but I feel it. But you're right, Dan. It would cost a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't know how feasible it would have been.
Yeah.
I think they could have maybe used a few models, but they would have just used CGI. Why not? You've already got huge billing for these actors, and it's already a lot of filming. I think with Spruce Goose models, probably used the ship for some things.
Yeah, that's true.
It was probably very expensive.
They had to buy a lot of mason jars.
Mason jars. Yes, a lot of milk, a lot of white
too.
powder, and
Big prop
Unless you
budget.
forget soap.
it still, I'm sure, was a very expensive movie to make anyway.
Yeah.
So that would have been awesome, but I think it got the point of showing how awesome it was back then.
Yeah.
You know.
That is going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Film Fanatics. We certainly appreciate you guys for listening. We do have the Listener's Choice Old Classic coming up very soon, so if you have an idea for that, you can hit us up here on the channel, which if you have not subscribed to yet, you can do that as well. But you could also hit us on the Facebook group, Film Fanatics with an exclamation point, or tweet us at Film Fanatics Pod. That's going to do it for the show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye!